I came home earlier than expected. My son-in-law hit me while my daughter destroyed my kitchen. That same night, the police escorted me to my new penthouse. And if right now you feel a lump in your throat, if something inside you recognizes this pain, I only ask that you leave a like and subscribe. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for a second, feel like this seems familiar, I just ask you to leave a like and subscribe. You'll be helping me continue to unburden myself. My name is Helen Miller. I'm 64 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed my life had meaning. I believed the sacrifices I had made for decades would finally be returned as love, as respect, as a warm place beside my family. But that Thursday afternoon, when I returned from the hospital where I'd been taking care of my sister Lucy in Harrisburg, I discovered that everything I thought I knew about my daughter was a carefully constructed lie. The Greyhound bus dropped me at the Central Station in Philadelphia at 4 in the afternoon. I had planned to come back on Sunday after making sure Lucy could walk without help following her hip surgery. But that morning, as I was making the chicken noodle soup that always comforted her, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't a physical pain. It was an unease that ran along my ribs like cold fingers, an inner voice telling me, "Go home, now." I'm not the kind of person who ignores her instincts. My mother always said the women in our family had a sixth sense for danger. So, I called my niece to look after Lucy for the last few nights, packed my things in the worn-out suitcase that had been my mother's, and took the first bus available. During the 3-hour drive, I entertained myself by watching the landscape change from the rolling hills of central Pennsylvania to the dense urban sprawl surrounding Philadelphia. I thought about my daughter, April, about how she was born on a night of torrential rain, with the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, fighting to breathe from the first second of her life. I thought about the sleepless nights when she had asthma, and I would rock her in my arms until dawn, singing her the same songs my grandmother sang to me. I thought about how I'd worked double shifts at Henderson's fabric store to pay for her private high school when her father left us with nothing but debts and broken promises. April was my pride and joy. Or at least, I had repeated that to myself for so long that I'd come to believe it, even when the signs pointed to the contrary. I got off the bus with my suitcase and the tote bag I always carried. I decided to stop by the Reading Terminal Market before heading home. I knew April had been stressed with the baby, with Julian, with the bills. I thought that making her favorite meatloaf, the one with the secret touch of nutmeg and brown sugar, just as my mother taught me, would be a way to show her I was still thinking of her, that despite the physical distance these past few days, my heart had never left. I walked among the stalls, bursting with colors and smells, fresh parsley, dried chili peppers hanging from hooks, warm bread wrapped in cloth napkins. I bought a pound of the best ground beef, ripe tomatoes that smelled of damp earth, white onions, garlic. The butcher, Joe, recognized me even though it had been weeks since I'd last been there. "Helen, good to see you. How's the family?" "Doing well, Joe. Thank God," I replied with the automatic smile I had perfected over the years, the one that hid ever-deepening cracks. I paid with the last few dollars I had left from my monthly Social Security check. My wallet was nearly empty, but I didn't care. Cooking for my daughter had always been my way of saying "I love you" when the words got stuck in my throat. The city bus left me 2 blocks from the house. My house. The house I had bought with the money from selling the plot of land my parents left me in the suburbs. The 3-story row house with the brownstone facade and wrought iron window frames that I had restored with my own hands over months. The house I had loaned to April when she married Julian, because it'll just be temporary, Mom, until we save up for our own place. That had been 4 years ago. As I walked down the cobblestone street, with the grocery bags weighing down my arms and the afternoon sun filtering through the dogwood trees, I noticed something strange. The front door of my house was ajar. Not locked, as I'd always asked April to leave it for safety, but wide open, like a mouth screaming in silence. My heart began to beat faster. I quickened my pace. And then I heard it. Shouting. The metallic clang of something hitting something else. A man's laughter, the cruel kind that makes your skin crawl. My daughter's voice not screaming in fear, but in uncontrolled fury. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, still carrying the groceries. What I saw left me paralyzed on the threshold, as if I had stepped into another dimension where everything familiar had become grotesque and threatening. My kitchen. My beautiful kitchen with the hand-painted tiles I had laid one by one, where I had prepared thousands of meals, where I had taught April to knead dough when she was 7. It was destroyed. Broken plates covered the floor like porcelain snow. Flour hung in the air, mixing with spilled oil that formed slippery puddles on the linoleum. The embroidered tablecloth that had belonged to my grandmother, with its delicate bluebirds stitched by hand, hung in shreds from the table. The chairs were overturned. The crystal fruit bowl my mother had given me for my wedding was smashed against the wall, leaving a stain of crushed bananas and glittering glass. And in the middle of this chaos was my daughter. April was holding my cast-iron skillet, the one that had belonged to 4 generations of women in my family, and slamming it again and again against the wooden table. Her brown hair was stuck to her forehead with sweat. Her eyes, those eyes I had kissed when she was a baby, shone with a rage I didn't recognize. Julian, her husband, was leaning against the refrigerator, a beer in his hand and a lazy smile on his face. He didn't even flinch when I walked in. He looked at me the way you look at an annoying fly, with that casual contempt that is more hurtful than open hatred. "What are you doing to my kitchen?" The words escaped my throat like an animal cry, primal, filled with a pain I didn't yet fully comprehend. The grocery bags fell from my hands. The tomatoes rolled across the floor, mixing with the broken glass. The meat spilled from its paper wrapping. April stopped dead. She turned to me, and in her face, I saw no surprise, no shame, not the slightest trace of guilt. Only irritation, annoyance at being interrupted. "What are you doing here?" she asked, in that tone she used to use when I'd ask her to clean her room as a teenager. "Weren't you coming back on Sunday?" The words hit me harder than any fist. Not, "Mom, I'm sorry." Not, "I can explain." Just that question, loaded with resentment, as if I were the intruder in my own home. "This is my house, April. The house I lent you while you got on your feet with the baby." Julian's laugh cut through the air like a knife. "Lent us?" He pushed himself off the refrigerator with slow, calculated movements, like a predator who knows its prey has no escape. "Helen, you don't own anything. This house was built on what your daughter and I have worked for. What you put in years ago doesn't even cover the interest on the mortgage we've been paying." I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. I bought this house with the money from my parents' property. I paid for every brick, every window, every— "You're an inconvenient guest," Julian interrupted, taking a step toward me. "A burden in an apron. An old woman who doesn't understand that her time is over." I looked at April, waiting, silently begging her to defend me, to say something, anything, to acknowledge everything I had done for her. But my daughter just lowered her gaze and dropped the skillet to the floor with a dull thud that echoed in my chest like a final sentence. She said nothing. She didn't defend me. She didn't acknowledge me. In that moment, something inside me broke, not my heart, because that would imply something clean and final. It was something deeper, more visceral, as if the foundations of my soul had cracked and everything I had built over 64 years began to crumble, taking with it every memory, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal I had skipped so she could eat, every dream I had abandoned so hers could come true. And the only thing I could think, as I stood there amid the rubble of my destroyed kitchen and the wreckage of my shattered life, was, when did I stop being her mother and become her enemy? My legs were trembling, but I forced myself to walk toward the refrigerator. I had to put the meat away before it spoiled. It was an absurd thought in the midst of the chaos, but after so many years of scarcity, of stretching every dollar until it hurt, my brain was still running on autopilot. Don't waste food, don't waste anything. When I reached for the refrigerator handle, Julian slammed the door shut with his forearm, so close to my face that I felt the air move. "We don't need your food anymore," he said in that slow voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, civilized, when in reality he was enjoying every second of my humiliation. "We'll order out. April and I prefer real food, not those recipes from the last century that taste like mothballs." The words burned more than any direct insult. Because he wasn't just rejecting my food. He was rejecting everything I was. My hands that had kneaded dough for 40 years. My knowledge passed down through generations. The entire Sundays spent in front of the stove preparing a Thanksgiving feast that required 2 days of prep. The early mornings baking Christmas cookies while April slept, lulled by the scent of cinnamon and sugar. "This is my kitchen!" I screamed, and my voice sounded high-pitched, desperate, unrecognizable. "I cook with love, with history. This skillet belonged to my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother. And what good is that if nobody cares?" April's voice cut the air like glass. I turned to her, searching her face for any trace of the little girl who used to sit on the kitchen counter, legs dangling, asking me why sugar made the donuts sparkle, why lemon-curdled milk, why pies had to be made by hand and not with a machine. The little girl who told me, "When I grow up, I want to cook just like you, Mommy." But that little girl was gone. Or maybe she never existed. Maybe I had created a version of my daughter that was easier to love than the real person standing in front of me. I tried to get around Julian to at least pick up my skillet from the floor. It was the only thing I had left of my mother. The only tangible connection to the women in my lineage who had survived depressions, famines, migrations, violence. That skillet had fed 4 generations. It had cooked the first egg for every baby in the family. It had roasted chestnuts at Christmas. It had made pancakes on Saturday mornings. As I bent down to reach for it, Julian pushed me. It wasn't a violent shove, the kind that leaves immediate bruises. It was calculated, precise. A jab with his elbow to my right shoulder, right where the arthritis had begun to settle in recent months. The pain was instant and blinding, as if someone had driven ice picks directly into the bone. I lost my balance and fell against the wall. My head hit the edge of the spice rack. Small glass jars of oregano, cumin, and pepper began to fall around me like rain, shattering on the floor in a symphony of destruction. No one screamed. No one ran to help me. The silence that followed was more deafening than any explosion. I stayed there, sitting on the cold floor of my kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and spilled spices, my shoulder throbbing and tears burning my eyes. Tears I refused to let fall in front of them. I looked up. April was standing by the table, arms crossed over her chest. She didn't even blink. Her eyes were fixed on a point somewhere above my head, as if I were a piece of fallen furniture that someone else would eventually have to pick up. Julian got another beer from the fridge, the sound of the can opening like a sneer. "If it weren't for the respect I have for your age," he said without looking at me, addressing April more than me, "you would have been out of this house months ago. But I'm a patient man. A man who understands family obligations, even when they're not returned." But there was no respect. There never had been. And in that moment, lying on the floor of my own kitchen while my son-in-law drank calmly and my daughter looked away, I understood something fundamental. The respect I had taught them to give, they had never learned to give back. I got up slowly, leaning against the wall. Every movement was an agony, not just physical, but emotional. It felt as if I were carrying the weight of all my years of sacrifice on my shoulders, and that weight had finally become unbearable. "I'm going to my room," I mumbled, but no one answered. I climbed the stairs, clinging to the banister, each step a mountain. My room was on the 3rd floor, the smallest space in the house, the one I had chosen for myself when I lent the property to April and Julian. "It'll just be temporary," my daughter had told me with that sweet smile that could disarm all my defenses. "As soon as we save some money, we'll move out and you can have your whole house back, Mom." 4 years later, I was still in the 3rd floor room, and they had turned the main rooms into their personal territory. My old bedroom, where I had slept for 20 years, was now their master bedroom. The study where I had sewn and read for countless nights was now their walk-in closet. The living room with windows facing the garden, where I had coffee every morning watching the azaleas grow, was now filled with their things, their giant TV, their modern furniture that clashed with the house's architecture, their photographs in which I did not appear. I had become a tenant in my own home, a stranger tolerated out of someone else's generosity. I locked the door to my room. It was the only door in the entire house that had a lock, and I had installed it myself 6 months ago when I started noticing my things disappearing. First, it was small pieces of jewelry. A silver ring my mother gave me, a pair of pearl earrings I inherited from my grandmother. Then, money, bills I kept in a cookie tin in the closet, savings from my Social Security that mysteriously vanished. When I asked April about it, she looked at me with that perfected expression of annoyance. "Mom, you're getting older. You probably misplaced them yourself and don't remember. You should see a doctor, sometimes your memory." But I wasn't losing my memory. I was being stolen from. In my own house. With my own daughter as a silent accomplice, if not the direct culprit. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed. The room was Spartan. A single bed with a mattress that sagged in the middle, an old wooden wardrobe that barely fit half my clothes, a nightstand with a flickering lamp. On the wall, a framed photograph of April when she was 5, smiling with her 2 front teeth missing, hugging a stuffed bunny I had sewn for her by hand. That photograph had given me comfort for years. Now it only reminded me of everything I had lost. My hands trembled as I took my cell phone from my pocket. It was an old flip phone, because I'd never learned to use touchscreens, and April had mocked me every time I asked for help. "Seriously, Mom, you can't learn something so simple? Even 3-year-olds can use a smartphone." I dialed 911 with frozen fingers. Each number seemed to require a superhuman effort. 3 numbers that separate a normal life from the breaking point where you decide you can't take it anymore. 911. "What's your emergency?" The voice on the other end was professional, almost mechanical. I've been assaulted." The words came out choked, as if I had to pull them from some deep place inside me where I had been storing the pain for too long. In my own home. My son-in-law pushed me, he hit me, and my daughter did nothing. "Are you in immediate danger, ma'am?" "I'm locked in my room. The door is locked. But I can't stay here. Not anymore." While I waited for the operator to connect my call to the nearest patrol car, I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Under a blessed rosary and some old letters, I found the envelope. It was a thick manila envelope, with the seal of the County Recorder of Deeds. Inside was the deed to an apartment in Rittenhouse Square that my mother had left me when she died, 11 years ago. A small penthouse in an Art Deco building from the 1940s, with high windows and original mosaic floors. I had never claimed it. I had never done the necessary paperwork to transfer it to my name and take possession. Because I was fine here, with my family. Because I didn't need more space. Because April had convinced me that selling the apartment and putting the money in our family account would be the smartest thing to do. But I never sold it. Something inside me, some voice that sounded like my mother, told me to keep that envelope, not to show it, to hold it as a secret, like an escape hatch I hoped I would never have to use. That never had arrived. I opened the envelope with trembling hands and read the address over and over, as if it were a magic spell that could transport me away from this nightmare. Number 47, Pine Street, Apartment 5B, Rittenhouse Square. A neighborhood I'd seen grow since I was a child, with its tree-lined streets and historic brownstones converted into cafes and bookstores. A place where I could start over. A place where no one would hit me for trying to put meat in my own refrigerator. Through the window, I heard the sirens approaching. The sound grew until it filled the entire street. And with it, something inside me grew too. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was something more primal, more fierce. It was the decision that this ended today. That the rest of my life, however short or long, would not be spent begging for love from people who had forgotten I once gave it unconditionally. That night, I decided, no more. The knocks on the front door echoed through the house like thunder. I heard hurried footsteps downstairs, April's voice saying something I couldn't make out, and then the firm voice of an officer, Philadelphia Police. "We received a report of an assault at this address." I stood up from the bed and put the envelope with the deed in my purse. That old brown leather purse that had been my companion for 20 years, with its worn handles and ink-stained lining. I also put in my ID, my Medicare card, the photo of my parents on their silver wedding anniversary, and the rosary my mother placed in my hands when she was diagnosed with cancer. When I opened my bedroom door, the whole house seemed to vibrate with a different energy. It was no longer the space of silent torture where I had spent the last 4 years. It was a crime scene, and I was the victim who had finally found the courage to point out her attackers. I went down the stairs slowly, clinging to the banister because my shoulder still throbbed with every movement. 2 officers were at the entrance, a man in his 40s with a salt and pepper mustache and a serious expression, and a young woman with a sharp gaze who took in every detail of the room with the precision of someone trained to see beyond appearances. April was standing by the door, holding the baby. My grandson, Jacob, a 1.5 years old, with the same dark eyes his mother had as a child. The baby looked at me with curiosity, not understanding why there were uniformed strangers in his house, why his grandmother was coming down the stairs with tears in her eyes. "It's her," April said in that sweet voice she reserved for public occasions. "My mother. She's 64, and she's been very confused lately. We think she might be developing dementia. She forgets where she puts things, imagines situations that never happened." The lie slipped from her mouth so naturally that for a moment I doubted my own sanity. Was it possible I had imagined the push, the blow against the wall, the insults? But then I looked at my kitchen. The broken plates still covered the floor. The spilled oil glistened under the lights. My grandmother's tablecloth hung in tatters. My skillet lay abandoned in a corner. No, I hadn't imagined a thing. "Ma'am," the female officer approached me with measured steps. "Are you the one who made the call?" I nodded. My voice came out raspy, breaking on the consonants. "I'm Helen Miller. This is my house. I bought this property 15 years ago with the money from a sale of land I inherited from my parents. I allowed my daughter and her husband to live here temporarily 4 years ago. Today, I came back from Harrisburg earlier than expected and found my kitchen destroyed. When I tried to put my groceries in my refrigerator, my son-in-law pushed me, and I fell against the wall." "That's not true," Julian interrupted, appearing from the living room with that reasonable man expression he had perfected for such occasions. "My mother-in-law is unwell, officer. She's had paranoid episodes lately. We take care of her here because she has no one else. But it's getting harder. She falls on her own and then blames us. She breaks things and then says we did it." The officer looked me directly in the eyes. There was something in her gaze that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd heard these kinds of conflicting accusations, that she was trained to detect who was lying and who was telling the truth. "May I see your shoulder, Mrs. Miller?" I carefully pulled down the sleeve of my blouse. The area where Julian had hit me with his elbow already showed a dark bruise, purple mixed with a sickly yellow. The skin was swollen and hot to the touch. The officer took photos with her phone from several angles. Then she walked into the kitchen and also photographed the mess. The broken plates, the destroyed tablecloth, the overturned chairs, the spilled spices. She picked up my cast-iron skillet and examined it carefully, as if that object could tell her the whole story that words couldn't convey. "This kitchen shows signs of intentional violence," the officer said, addressing her partner. "It's not consistent with an accident or a senior's episode of confusion. There's rage here. Deliberate destruction. My wife was cooking." Julian maintained his calm tone, but something in his eyes flashed dangerously. "She dropped a few things. My mother-in-law came in upset and started screaming baseless accusations. I tried to calm her down and she tripped. That's all." "Why is an embroidered tablecloth ripped in multiple places?" the officer with the mustache asked, pointing to the shreds of fabric. "Why is there oil spilled in patterns that suggest it was thrown, not accidentally spilled?" April clutched Jacob tighter. The baby began to cry, as if he could feel the tension electrifying the room. "Officers, my mother has been under a lot of stress," April said, her voice now holding a pleading tone that almost convinced me. "She lost my father years ago. She lost her job at the fabric store. She's alone. Sometimes older people, when they feel abandoned, they invent dramas to get attention. It's not her fault. It's an illness." That word, illness. The way she said it, as if I were a medical problem they had generously tolerated. As if my pain were a hallucination. As if my wounds were self-inflicted. "I am not sick," I said. And my voice finally found its strength. "I am not confused. I know exactly what happened. I know exactly what I have endured for years. I turned to the officers and the words began to flow, like a river that had been held back by a dam for too long and had finally found a crack to escape through. I gave them this house when they got married. I told them it was temporary. 4 years later, I'm still living in the smallest room while they occupy the rest. I've paid for utilities. I've cooked. I've cleaned. I've watched the baby when they wanted to go out. They have never thanked me. They have never treated me with respect. And today, when I came home from caring for my sick sister and found my kitchen destroyed, my son-in-law hit me for daring to question what they were doing. That's a lie. April's voice rose, losing its feigned sweetness. This house is ours. We pay the mortgage. We pay the utilities. Mortgage? I interrupted. I paid for this house in full. There is no mortgage. The deed is in my name. Helen Miller. I can prove it. I took a copy of the deed from my purse, which I kept folded in a secret compartment. The paper was yellowed, stained at the corners, but the official seal was still legible. The female officer took it and read it carefully. This states that the property located at 132 Spruce Street is registered in the name of Helen Miller as of 2010, she read aloud. No other names appear on the deed. There is no record of an active mortgage. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Jacob stopped crying, as if the weight of that revelation was so great that even a baby could feel it. April looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't surprise, because she had always known the house was mine. It was pure fury. Fury that I had dared to speak the truth in front of witnesses. Fury that I had broken the silent pact that kept us in this toxic dynamic where I gave and she took, and neither of us openly acknowledged what was happening. Mrs. Miller, the officer said in a soft but firm voice, do you wish to leave this house tonight? We can escort you to a safe place. It could be a temporary shelter or the home of a relative or friend. I have nowhere to go, I answered, and in that moment the reality of my situation hit me with full force. I had no close family except Lucy, who was recovering in Harrisburg. I had no close friends, because I had spent the last few years completely devoted to helping my daughter. I had no savings, because everything I got from my Social Security I had invested in this house, its maintenance, the food, the baby's needs. Then I remembered the envelope, the apartment in Rittenhouse Square, my mother's inheritance that I had kept secret like a talisman against an uncertain future that had now brutally materialized. Yes, I do, I corrected myself, pulling out the envelope again. I have an apartment. My mother left it to me. I've never been there, but it's mine. The officer reviewed the documents and nodded. It's in your name, but you'll need to do some paperwork to take official possession. We can take you there tonight. If the apartment is vacant and the deed is valid, you have the right to enter. And my things? I asked, looking up the stairs that led to my tiny room. You can take what you can carry now, replied the officer with the mustache. Tomorrow you can return with a police escort to collect the rest of your belongings. For tonight, I recommend you get out of here. I looked at my daughter. She was holding Jacob so tightly that the baby began to squirm uncomfortably. Her eyes bored into me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. I wanted to say so many things to her. I wanted to ask when she had stopped loving me, if she ever really had. I wanted to ask if she ever woke up at night remembering all the times I had held her when she cried, all the times I had sacrificed my needs for hers. But the words got stuck in my throat, because deep down, I knew there were no answers that could heal what was broken between us. Some fractures are too deep to be mended with explanations. April, I finally said, and my voice sounded like a stranger's. Take good care of Jacob. Teach him to respect the people who love him. Teach him that family is not a resource to be exploited until it's depleted. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Julian stepped forward, his face red with contained anger. If you leave, don't come back. He spat the words. Don't show up later asking to see the boy. Don't come crying when you realize you made a mistake. This door closes today, ma'am. Forever. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but also a liberating one. I hope so, Julian. I hope so. I went up the stairs to my room one last time. I packed the essentials into an old suitcase. Underwear, 2 changes of clothes, my toothbrush, my childhood photo album, the letters my mother wrote to me during her illness. Everything that truly mattered fit into one small bag. The rest were just objects I had accumulated trying to build a life that was never really mine. When I came down, the officers were waiting for me by the door. April had locked herself in the living room with Jacob. Julian was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching me with a smirk of victory he thought he had won. But he didn't understand that I wasn't losing anything anymore. I was getting back something far more valuable: my dignity. The patrol car stopped in front of a 4-story building on Pine Street. The facade was gray stone, with Art Deco details that spoke of an era when architectural beauty mattered more than a space's efficiency. The windows were tall, with wrought iron frames forming geometric designs. At the entrance, a dark wooden door with stained glass panels cast blue and amber shadows on the lobby's mosaic floor, even under the dim light of the street lamps. It was beautiful, and I had never seen it. For 11 years, this place had existed as an abstraction on a legal paper, a name on a deed I kept folded in secret drawers. My mother had lived here for the last 5 years of her life, after selling the family home in the suburbs where I grew up. "It's smaller but more manageable," she had told me over the phone. "I don't need so much space anymore. And when I'm gone, it will be yours, my girl. A place just for you." But when she died, I was so consumed by grief and my responsibilities with April that I had postponed all the paperwork. "I'll go later," I would tell myself, "when I have time." As if time were something I controlled. As if life couldn't change in an instant and turn that later into a never. The officer, who had told me her name was Davis, helped me get my suitcase out of the car. Her partner, Officer Mendez, carried a flashlight because the street lighting on this block was spotty. "Do you have the keys, Mrs. Miller?" Officer Davis asked. I fumbled inside the envelope. At the bottom, in a small paper pouch attached to the deed, I found 2 old keys tied with a worn red velvet ribbon. One was large, made of dark iron with ornamental details. The other was smaller, modern, probably for the mailbox. The building had no elevator. The staircase was marble with an iron railing, and our footsteps echoed in the night silence. Some doors had nameplates with names handwritten on yellowed labels: the Herreras, Dr. Campos, Robles Sanchez. On the 3rd floor, a pot of dead geraniums sat in a corner, as if someone had watered them with hope for months before finally giving up. Apartment 5B was at the end of the hall, on the corner of the building. The wooden door had a small stained glass window at the top, similar to the one at the main entrance, with a design of birds and flowers that had lost its shine under layers of dust. I inserted the large key into the lock. It turned with resistance, rusted from years of disuse. When I finally managed to open it, the sound was like a long-held breath being released. The smell that came from inside wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was the scent of time standing still, accumulated dust mixed with old wood, stored books, and fabric that hadn't been aired out in years. There was a faint trace of the floral cologne my mother used to wear, or maybe it was just my imagination, my brain filling the void with memories I needed to keep from completely falling apart. Officer Davis found the light switch by the entrance. A ceiling lamp with a frosted glass shade illuminated the space with a warm, yellowish light. I stood frozen on the threshold. The apartment was small but perfectly proportioned. The entrance led directly into a living room with windows that took up the entire front wall, from the floor to nearly the ceiling. Through them, even in the dark, I could see the lights of other buildings and beyond, the dark silhouette of the trees in Rittenhouse Square. The furniture was still there, covered with white sheets that had turned gray with dust. I could make out the shapes: a sofa against the left wall, 2 armchairs, a low coffee table. On the opposite wall, a bookshelf reached the ceiling, so full of books that some shelves sagged in the middle. To the right of the living room was an integrated kitchen, separated only by a counter with blue and white ceramic tiles. The cabinets were light wood, with hand-painted ceramic knobs. "It's nice," Officer Davis said softly, as if afraid to break something with her voice. I couldn't answer. I walked slowly to the center of the living room, my steps leaving footprints in the dust on the geometric patterned tile floor. There were 2 doors at the back. The first opened to a small but complete bathroom, a clawfoot tub, a porcelain sink with brass fixtures, an old toilet with a high tank. The second door revealed the bedroom. A queen-sized bed with a wrought iron headboard stood in the center, also covered with a white sheet. On the wall above the bed hung a framed photograph. It was my mother, much younger, perhaps my current age. She was sitting on a park bench, smiling at the camera with that wide smile that lit up her whole face. Next to her, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was me. I must have been about 8, with 2 long braids and a Sunday dress. We were both eating ice cream, and the sun created a golden halo around our heads. It was that image that finally broke the dam. I cried. Not the silent, restrained weeping I had maintained for months, perhaps years. This was a cry that came from somewhere so deep it hurt physically. My knees buckled and I ended up sitting on the edge of the covered bed, my face in my hands, sobbing so hard my whole body shook. I cried for my mother, who had left me this sanctuary knowing that one day I would need it. I cried for the daughter I had lost, or perhaps never had in the way I thought I did. I cried for the years wasted trying to buy love with sacrifice. I cried for the woman I had been, who had allowed herself to be turned into a shadow. Officer Davis sat next to me. She said nothing. She didn't try to comfort me with empty words. She simply placed a hand on my shoulder and let me cry. Sometimes that's all a person needs, a silent witness to their pain. I don't know how long it was. When the tears finally ran out, leaving only small shudders in my chest, I wiped my face on my sleeve. "Thank you," I whispered. "Nothing to thank me for, Mrs. Miller," she replied. "Do you need anything before we go? We can find an all-night pharmacy to get you something for your shoulder." I shook my head. The physical pain was almost unnoticeable compared to everything else. "I'll be fine. I just need to sleep. I need this day to be over." The officers left after making sure the locks worked and giving me a card with emergency numbers. "Anything, just call," Officer Mendez said. "And go to the precinct tomorrow to file a formal report. It's important to have it documented." When I closed the door and was completely alone, the silence was overwhelming. It wasn't the hostile silence of my room in April's house, where every noise reminded me I was an intruder. This was a different silence. It was the silence of a place that was waiting for me, that had been kept like an unopened gift for 11 years. I walked through the apartment, removing the sheets from the furniture. Under the dust, the colors emerged. The sofa was deep green velvet, the armchairs a worn but soft brown leather. The bookshelf was a treasure trove of Latin American novels, poetry, and traditional cookbooks. In the kitchen, the cabinets held a full set of dishes, pots, and pans. My mother had left this place fully equipped, ready to be lived in. The refrigerator was empty and unplugged, but in the pantry I found an unexpected stash: 3 cans of beans, a sealed package of rice, 2 cans of tuna, and a box of crackers that were still surprisingly crisp. It wasn't much, but it was infinitely more than Julian had left me in my own refrigerator. That night I slept in my mother's bed, on sheets that smelled of stored years but were soft against my skin. I lay fully clothed, my purse next to the bed and my phone in my hand, half expecting April to call, to say it had all been a horrible misunderstanding, to beg me to come back. But the phone remained silent all night, and for the first time in years, so did my mind. No replaying imaginary conversations, no wondering what I had done wrong, just silence. Clean, pure, liberating. Outside, the city hummed its nightly rhythm, but inside this small apartment, in this bed that had belonged to my mother and was now mine, for the first time in decades, I felt something I had forgotten existed: peace. I woke to the sun streaming through the curtainless windows. It took me a moment to remember where I was. My shoulder still ached, the bruise having bloomed overnight into a canvas of purples and greens that told yesterday's story with more honesty than any words. From the window, I could see the rooftops of other buildings and glimpses of the lush green trees of Rittenhouse Square. It was a modest view, but it was mine. My stomach growled. I wondered what had happened to the meat for the meatloaf. Julian probably threw it in the trash with the same contempt he had thrown me out of his life. In the kitchen, I found a 3-year expired package of coffee, but it still smelled intense. I made it on an old stovetop percolator and ate a can of cold beans, standing by the kitchen window, watching the street wake up below. It was a completely ordinary scene, but for me, who had spent years in a constant state of tension. This normality was extraordinary. The phone buzzed in my pocket. My heart leaped. It was a text from an unknown number. "Mom, I know you're mad, but we need to talk. Things got out of hand. Come home tomorrow afternoon. We can work this out like adults. April." I read the message 3 times. Things got out of hand, as if it were a cosmic accident and not their deliberate choice. Like adults, implying I had been the childish one. I didn't reply. I kept eating my cold beans. Later that morning, I went out to explore. On the first floor, a woman in her 70s was sweeping the entryway. "Are you Antonia's daughter?" she asked without preamble. "Yes, I'm Helen. Mrs. Gable," she said, offering a firm handshake. "I live in 2B. Your mother was a very fine lady. When she got sick, I'd bring her soup sometimes. She talked about you. Said you were a hard worker, devoted to your family. She said one day you'd come here and find peace. My Helen needs peace, she'd tell me, and she'll find it here." I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. "Are there any debts on the apartment? Maintenance fees?" "Not that I know of. Your mother paid 5 years of condo fees in advance before she passed. Said she didn't want you to worry about it when you arrived. My mother had planned everything. It was as if she knew that one day I would need to escape. I spent the rest of the day running errands. I went to the police precinct to file the formal assault report. I went to reconnect the gas and electricity. By the afternoon, the apartment had power and gas. I sat on the green velvet sofa and looked around. It needed a deep cleaning. It needed paint. But it was livable. It was mine. And no one could take it from me. The phone buzzed again. Another text from April. This one more urgent. "Mom, answer me. I need to talk to you about something important. It's about Jacob. He's asking for you." This time, the manipulation was clumsy and obvious. Jacob was 1.5 years old. He was just starting to say single words. He wasn't asking for me in any meaningful way. But April knew that mentioning my grandson was my weak spot, the crack in my armor she had always been able to exploit to get what she wanted. Before, I would have answered immediately. I would have rushed back, worried about the baby, willing to forget any offense if it meant I could be near my grandson. But something had changed. Maybe it was sleeping through a whole night in peace. Maybe it was discovering that my mother had left this refuge knowing I would need it. Maybe it was simply the accumulated exhaustion of years spent trying to buy love with sacrifice. I didn't reply. On the 3rd day, the tone of the messages shifted. "Mom, enough with the games. I know you're seeing my messages. We need to talk about the house. There are papers you have to sign, legal stuff. Don't be childish." Then hours later, "Are you really going to do this to us? After everything we've done for you? We gave you a roof over your head. We fed you. We put up with you when no one else would. And this is how you repay us?" And finally, on the 4th day, "Fine. If you want to play it that way, we will. Julian has already spoken to a lawyer. We're going to fight for the house. We have residency rights. And more importantly, you should think long and hard about whether you want to lose your grandson. Because if you don't fix this, you will never see him again." I read that last message sitting in my kitchen, a cup of hot tea between my hands. It was night, and the windows reflected my face. A 64-year-old woman with deep, dark circles under her eyes, gray hair that needed a cut, and wrinkles that told stories of worry more than laughter. But there was something different in those eyes, too. Something I hadn't seen in years. Determination. April had played the grandson card thinking it was her ace in the hole. But what she didn't understand was that using a baby as a weapon was the exact confirmation I needed that I had made the right decision. If she was willing to take my grandson away to manipulate me, then what she had been offering me was never love. It was control. It was a transaction. It was an exchange where I gave everything and she took everything. And the day I stopped giving, I would lose access to the one thing that kept me tied to her. That night, I made a decision. The next morning, I would find a lawyer. I would defend my house, not because I wanted to take it from April, but because I needed to set clear boundaries. I needed it to be legally documented that the property was mine, that they had been guests who had overstayed their welcome, that I had rights. And above all, I needed to start building a life that didn't depend on scraps of affection from people who had proven time and again that they didn't value me. I poured myself more tea and walked to the living room windows. The city glittered below, millions of lights representing millions of lives carrying on. Knowing nothing of my small, personal drama, it was comforting in a way. The world was so much bigger than my pain. Somewhere in that city, April was probably awake too, planning her next move, calculating how to regain control over me. Julian would be convincing her that they were right, that I was the villain of this story. But for the first time in years, I no longer cared. Because I had discovered something fundamental. I didn't need them to love me. I needed to love myself enough not to accept less than I deserved. And I did not deserve this. Gabriella Russo's law office was on the second floor of a historic building in Old City, above a used bookstore that smelled of old paper and freshly brewed coffee. Mrs. Gable had given me her name. "She's the daughter of a friend of mine," she'd said. "Honest, a hard worker, and she isn't afraid of anyone. If anyone can help you, it's her." Gabriella turned out to be a woman in her mid-40s, with thick-rimmed glasses and short hair. She constantly pushed away from her face with a gesture that seemed more nervous habit than necessity. Her office was organized chaos. Towers of files on every available surface, colorful sticky notes plastered on the walls like constellations of reminders, and 3 coffee mugs in different stages of consumption on her desk. "Please, have a seat, Helen," she said, pointing to a chair I had to clear of papers before I could use it. "Mrs. Gable told me a bit about your situation on the phone. But tell me in your own words what's happening." And I told her everything. From lending the house to April and Julian temporarily 4 years ago, to the unexpected return, the destroyed kitchen, the assault, the humiliation. I showed her the photos the police had taken of my bruise. I showed her the threatening messages from April, and I gave her a copy of the deed to the house in Chestnut Hill. Gabriella took notes in a spiral notebook, her brow furrowing more and more as my story unfolded. "And were they paying you rent?" she asked without looking up. "No, they never paid me a thing. She was my daughter. It was temporary, I thought." "Is there any kind of lease? A written agreement specifying the terms of the loan?" I shook my head, feeling more and more foolish. "Nothing. It was all a verbal agreement. She said they just needed a place while they saved for their own, that it would only be a few months. I trusted her." Gabriella finally looked up, her expression a mix of compassion and professional frustration. "Helen, legally, you're in a strong but complicated position. The house is yours. That's documented. But they've established residency for 4 years. That gives them certain tenants' rights. They can't just be thrown out without a legal process." The words landed like stones in my stomach. "So they can keep my house? After what they did to me?" "No, they can't keep it. But you can't just evict them tomorrow either. We need to start a formal eviction proceeding, which could take anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending on how difficult they decide to be. We can also file a lawsuit for property damage and for the physical assault. It's all documented, which helps us enormously." "A year?" My voice sounded hollow. "I have to wait a year to get my house back?" "It's the legal process. The law here provides a lot of protection for tenants, even when they don't pay rent. But there's something more important here." Gabriella took off her glasses and looked at me directly. "Do you really want to go back to living in that house? After everything that happened there?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about that. I had automatically assumed my goal was to get back what was mine, to expel the invaders, to restore the previous order. But Gabriella was right. What would I do in that house? So full of tainted memories, where every room would remind me of years of humiliation. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "Maybe not. But it's mine. It's the only thing I have." "You have the apartment in Rittenhouse Square," Gabriella reminded me. "And you have options. We can fight the eviction and eventually sell the property, maybe splitting the value if we have to reach a settlement. Or we can go to a full trial and win, and you keep everything. It depends on how far you want to take this and how much energy you want to invest." We spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents, filling out forms, and planning a strategy. Gabriella explained that the physical assault was our strongest argument because it proved my safety was at risk living with them. The photos of the destroyed kitchen were evidence of domestic violence. April's threatening messages were proof of intimidation. "We're going to request a temporary restraining order," Gabriella said. "That means neither your daughter nor your son-in-law can come near you, contact you, or threaten you while the legal process is ongoing. And we're going to send a formal eviction notice." From that moment, the clock starts ticking. When I left her office 3 hours later, with a folder full of legal documents under my arm and a clear plan of action, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. Not over the entire situation, that was impossible, but over my own response to it. The process began quickly. A week later, a process server knocked on the door of my former home and handed April and Julian the official documents: the eviction notice, the lawsuit for damages, the assault complaint, and the request for a restraining order. That afternoon, my phone exploded. 27 missed calls, 15 voicemails I didn't listen to, dozens of text messages that grew increasingly hysterical. "How could you do this to me? I'm your daughter, your only daughter. Are you going to make your own grandson homeless? You are a snake, an ungrateful monster. Everything we did for you, and this is how you repay us. Mom, please, we can talk, we can fix this. You're going to regret this. When you're old and sick and need help, I won't be there. I hope you die alone." Each message was a stab, but it was also evidence. Gabriella had told me to save everything, to delete nothing, that every word they wrote in their emotional state would help us in court. So I saved them all, taking screenshots, filing them in a special folder. After the flood of messages came the silence. 2 weeks without a single word. It was almost worse than the insults, because in that silence my imagination filled the void with increasingly terrible scenarios. What if they did something to Jacob to punish me? What if I was really making an irreparable mistake? But then Gabriella called with news. "Helen, I have to inform you of something. Your daughter and son-in-law have hired a lawyer, and they're countersuing." "For what?" "They're claiming you promised them the house as a gift when they got married, that there are witnesses to this promise, that they invested money in improvements and repairs with the expectation that the property would eventually be theirs. They're asking the court to recognize a verbal contract and compensate them for the years of maintaining the property." I felt the floor disappear from under my feet. That's a lie. I never promised to give them anything. It was a temporary loan. I know. And we're going to prove it. But this means the process will be longer and more complicated. They're going to fight, and they're going to fight dirty. Gabriella was right. In the weeks that followed, April and Julian launched a full-scale campaign to destroy my credibility. They contacted distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, convincing them I was senile, that I had lost my mind, that I was being manipulated by unscrupulous lawyers who just wanted my money. They posted on social media. April wrote a long post presenting herself as a devoted daughter who had sacrificed everything to care for her aging, sick mother, only to be betrayed and falsely accused. The post included carefully selected photos: her with a smiling Jacob, her cooking in her kitchen, her cleaning her house. Not a single photo included the person who actually owned it all. The comments were predictable. "What a selfless daughter. Mothers can get so difficult with age. It's so sad when family is torn apart by money. Praying for you, sweetie. God will reward you." Some people sent me private messages. Second cousins who hadn't spoken to me in decades suddenly appeared with unsolicited advice. "Helen, don't you think you're overreacting? At your age, do you really want to fight with your only daughter? Think of Jacob. Children need stability." Every message was a small dose of poison. They made me doubt. They made me question if I was being selfish, vengeful, cruel. In my lowest moments, I considered calling Gabriella and telling her to stop everything, that it didn't matter, that I'd rather lose the house if it meant getting back some kind of relationship with my daughter. It was Mrs. Gable who stopped me. One afternoon, when she saw me crying on the building's staircase, phone in hand after a particularly cruel message from an aunt telling me my mother would be ashamed of me, she sat down next to me and placed her wrinkled hand on mine. "Do you know what your mother told me before she passed?" Mrs. Gable asked. She said, "My Helen has a good heart. Too good. She'll let people walk all over her for her whole life if someone doesn't teach her she has a right to defend herself. She made me promise that if you ever came to this apartment running from something, I would help you stand your ground. My mother knew. The words came out between sobs. Mothers always know, dear. Your mother saw how April treated you when she came to visit. She saw how you apologized for things that weren't your fault, how you made yourself small so your daughter could feel big. And it hurt her. It hurt her soul. But you were a grown woman, and she couldn't force you to open your eyes. So she did the only thing she could. She left you a refuge for when you finally did. That conversation gave me the strength to continue. My mother knew me better than I knew myself. She had seen what I refused to see, and had prepared my escape years before I knew I would need it. 2 months after the lawsuit began, the day of the first hearing arrived. I had to see them. April and Julian walked into the courtroom with their lawyer, a man in an expensive suit with a leather briefcase and the look of a shark. April wore a conservative dress and had her hair pulled back, looking the perfect picture of a concerned daughter. Julian had a funereal expression, as if this were all a personal tragedy he was bearing with admirable dignity. They didn't look at me. Not once. They walked past me as if I were invisible, as if the years of my life I had dedicated to them simply didn't exist. The judge, a man in his 60s with the weary expression of someone who has seen too many family dramas, reviewed the documents from both sides. He listened to the arguments. He examined the photos of my bruise, the images of the destroyed kitchen, the threatening messages. He also listened to April's lawyer's pleas about a poor young family being evicted by a resentful mother. "We're going to need more time to review all of this evidence," the judge finally said. "But I must say, the photographs of the physical injury are troubling. I am going to grant a temporary restraining order while the proceedings continue. The defendants may not come within 100 yards of the plaintiff." April finally looked at me then, and the expression on her face was not one of sadness or remorse. It was pure hatred. She blamed me for all of this, for daring to defend myself, for breaking the silent agreement where I gave, and she took, and neither questioned the arrangement. I walked out of the courthouse, knowing I had crossed a point of no return. There was no going back. This war would continue until someone won and someone lost, and for the first time in my life, I was willing to fight to the end. The months that followed were a lesson in survival that no one had ever taught me. I had spent 64 years learning how to care for others, to sacrifice for others, to measure my worth by how much I could give. Now I had to learn something completely different: how to live for myself. The apartment in Rittenhouse Square became my project, my distraction, my therapy. With the little I had left from my Social Security after paying Gabriella, I bought paint. I chose a warmer cream color for the walls and a soft sage green for the kitchen that reminded me of the mint plants my mother used to grow in pots. Painting was meditative. Each stroke of the brush covered not only the water stains and cracks of time, but also pieces of my pain, perched on a stepladder borrowed from Mrs. Gable. With paint splattering my hair and hands, I found I could go hours without thinking about April, without checking my phone for a message that would never come, without wondering how Jacob was. Well, that was a lie. I thought about Jacob constantly. I would wake up in the middle of the night imagining his giggle, remembering the weight of his little body in my arms, the smell of powder and milk on his skin. He had been my comfort during the worst days of living with April and Julian. When they treated me as if I were invisible, Jacob saw me. When they ignored me, Jacob would reach his little arms out to me. Losing him hurt more than everything else combined. But Mrs. Gable would repeat the same thing every time she saw me cry. "A grandchild raised by parents who use love as a weapon will learn to use love as a weapon. Is that what you want for him?" She was right, but that didn't make it hurt any less. One afternoon, as I was sanding the window frames to prepare them for a new coat of varnish, there was a knock on my door. For an irrational second, my heart leaped, thinking it might be April, finally come to apologize. It was Mrs. Gable with a younger woman, about 40, with dark hair and a ponytail and a kind smile. "Helen, this is Claudia," Mrs. Gable said. "She lives upstairs with her 2 kids. I told her you used to do embroidery, and it turns out she has a small clothing business and is looking for someone to help with special pieces. Claudia extended her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Helen. My mom used to embroider, and when she passed away 2 years ago, I lost my main supplier. Mrs. Gable showed me some pictures of your work, and it's exactly the style I'm looking for. Do you still do it? It had been years since I'd touched a needle. When I worked at the fabric store before it closed, I would embroider napkins and tablecloths in my spare time to sell for a little extra cash. But after moving in with April, I'd never had the time. There was always something more urgent to do. I haven't embroidered in a long time, I admitted. I don't know if my hands still remember. The hands always remember, Claudia said with the confidence of someone who knows the craft. And if you're interested, I pay well. I have clients looking for unique handmade pieces. I have a show at a gallery in Old City in 3 months, and I need at least 20 pieces. If you could do even half, it would be amazing. We talked about prices, designs, deadlines. When Claudia left, leaving me with fabric samples and some sketches, I sat on my newly cleaned sofa and looked at the materials as if they were archaeological treasures from a past life. That night, I bought threads at a craft store. Deep reds, cobalt blues, emerald greens. The first stitch was clumsy. My fingers, stiff with arthritis and lack of practice, resisted. But gradually, as Claudia had predicted, the hands remembered. The stitches began to flow. I embroidered an entire napkin that night, a design of birds and flowers I had learned from my grandmother. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had created it, with my own hands, without depending on anyone, without asking for permission or forgiveness. They were tears of rediscovery, of remembering that before I was April's mother or Jacob's grandmother, I had been Helen. Just Helen. The embroidery work became my anchor. The designs grew more complex as my fingers regained their skill. Claudia was delighted and paid me more than we'd agreed. Soon, a boutique in Manayunk wanted embroidered blouses. Then a designer preparing a new collection. For the first time in decades, I had money that was entirely my own. I bought a new smartphone and learned how to use it by watching YouTube tutorials. I bought new clothes from a small boutique, where the owner helped me pick colors that made my skin glow. I bought hand cream that smelled of lavender. Each small purchase was an act of rebellion against years of self-denial. 6 months after the first hearing, the final trial date arrived. The night before, I couldn't sleep. Mrs. Gable knocked on my door at 6 in the morning with a thermos of coffee and a pastry. "You need your strength today," she said, sitting with me in silence as we watched the sunrise. In the courtroom, Gabriella presented our case with surgical precision. She showed the deed, the photos of my bruise, April's threatening messages, and screenshots of the defamatory social media posts. "This is not a property dispute," she concluded. "This is a case of prolonged family abuse where the victim finally found the courage to defend herself. And now the abusers want to be rewarded for their years of mistreatment by being given the house that was never theirs." The judge called a 20-minute recess. When he returned, his expression was clear. "I have reviewed all evidence. The property is deeded to Mrs. Helen Miller without ambiguity. There is no contract of gift or promise of sale. The evidence of physical injury and threatening messages is clear evidence of domestic violence. Therefore, I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendants have 30 days to vacate the property. Furthermore, they are ordered to pay damages in the amount of $5,000 for material damages and defamation." The gavel fell with a sharp crack. I had won. I looked at April. She was pale, her hands clenched in her lap. Julian's face was red with fury. I didn't feel triumph, just a profound exhaustion, as if I had been carrying a huge boulder up a mountain for years and could finally let it go. Gabriella hugged me, and I could only nod because all the words were gone. It's been 8 months since that afternoon. I'm sitting on the balcony of my apartment in Rittenhouse Square, a small balcony with just enough room for 2 wrought iron chairs I bought at an antique market, and pots of red geraniums Mrs. Gable helped me plant. The house in Chestnut Hill was sold 3 months ago. April and Julian moved out on the 30th day, taking what they could and leaving the rest as trash. They had ripped the hand-painted tiles out of the kitchen as a final act of revenge. It hurt to see, but it also freed me. People who love you don't destroy what was yours just because they can no longer have it. I sold the property as is to a developer. It was less than it was worth, but it was enough. Enough to pay my legal fees, make repairs to the apartment, and save money for the first time in my life. I haven't heard from April. Sometimes I search for her on social media. She deleted the posts defaming me. Now she posts pictures of Jacob, pictures of herself smiling, motivational quotes about letting go of toxic people and protecting your peace. I have been edited out of her story. I wonder what she will tell Jacob about me when he's older. My embroidery business has flourished. A design magazine did a feature on artisans preserving traditional techniques, and they included a photo of me in my living room, smiling, for the first time in years. The money I earn is my own. I spend it on things I once considered impossible luxuries. New books, a streaming subscription, yoga classes near the park. There are still hard days. Days when I see a young woman with a baby and my heart aches for Jacob. Days when I wonder if I did the right thing. But those days are fewer now. And when they come, I have tools. I call Gabriella, who has become a friend. I knock on Mrs. Gable's door. I sit on my balcony and embroider until my fingers ache and my mind is calm. I've made new friends at yoga. Women my age also rebuilding their lives after divorce, widowhood, or just years of losing themselves. We are generations of women taught that our value lies in how much we can sacrifice. And now, in the second half of our lives, we are learning the most important lesson, that we also have the right to say, enough. Yesterday was my 65th birthday. Mrs. Gable showed up with a small chocolate cake. We ate it with coffee, and she told me stories about my mother. She knew you were too good for your own good, Mrs. Gable said. But she also knew you'd learn eventually. Strong women sometimes need to break to realize their own strength. She was right, my mother. I broke completely that afternoon in my destroyed kitchen. But from those broken pieces, I built something new, something stronger, something that is entirely mine. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had come home on Sunday as planned. I would probably still be there, a little smaller, a little more invisible each day, until I disappeared completely. But I came home early, and that instinct was my salvation. Now I understand that sometimes real love is letting go. It's setting boundaries. It's saying no more, even when it hurts so much you think you might break in two. My life is simple now, quiet. To some, it might seem lonely, but to me, it is peace. It's the chance to know myself without the constant noise of other people's demands. I look at my phone, the one I bought with my own money, and I think about writing something, not to April, but maybe to someone out there who is going through what I went through. Someone who feels invisible in their own life. And I want to ask you, have you ever felt like you give everything and get nothing in return? Do you know someone living this right now? Tell me in the comments. Sometimes we just need to know we're not alone in our pain to find the courage to get out of it. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own boundaries and your own worth, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Maybe this story will reach someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe it's the sign someone is waiting for to give themselves permission to choose themselves. Because that's the most important lesson I learned. You cannot buy love with sacrifice. You cannot earn respect by allowing disrespect. And it is never too late to start over. I did it at 64, with no money, no support, and nothing but an old deed and the memory of a mother who loved me enough to leave me a refuge. And if I could do it, so can you. The life you deserve is waiting for you. You just have to be brave enough to claim it.